You're listening to the Today's Conveyancer podcast, the leading source of information for residential property lawyers in England and Wales. Don't forget to subscribe and sign up to our free newsletter at todaysconveyancer.co.uk. You can also follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter.
Hello, welcome along to the latest Today's Conveyancer podcast. Today we have David Kempster, Chief Customer Officer at Groundshaw, on to talk about a new tool that's been developed with Groundshaw and a number of other parties called Coast Clear. It's all about helping conveyancers and home movers understand the risk of coastal erosion. I hope I'm doing this justice, David. Thanks so much for joining the podcast.
You're welcome, David. And yes, hello. You have done that justice. Yes, absolutely.
First question, you've been on the podcast before. It's great to have you back on. But for those who haven't listened to your previous podcast or who don't know who you are, I can't imagine there are that many people out there. But tell us who you are and what you do.
Yes, as you said, Chief Customer Officer at Groundshaw. It's a relatively recent role I moved into, responsible for commercial growth, for the marketing and communications, and for our customer support functions as well.
So let's dive right into Coast Clear. There's a very brief overview from myself around coastal erosion. Tell us in the first instance what it is. It's a website and there's a whole load of information on there, isn't there?
Coastal erosion, people understand what it is, but what this primarily is about is consumer awareness. We traditionally are a business that has communicated with other businesses such as law firms and consultancies and so on. But this is something that we were passionately wanting to do because there seems to be a space in the market where there is some degree of not ignorance, but I think rose-tinted spectacles when it comes to buying a property on the coast. And we wanted to drive an important consumer awareness campaign nationwide for both homeowners and home buyers, because people tend to buy with their heart, not their head. Quite often they will have gone on holiday, they'd have done an Airbnb on the coast, and they then start flicking through Rightmove and get carried away. The idea of this was really just to make homeowners and home buyers really clear about what could happen as a result of having a property on the coast. As far as conveyancers are concerned, for the home buyers, it's about those firms and their regional law societies in the relevant areas really providing support and training and a way of differentiating what they do in terms of client care. There's two sides to this, one of which is direct consumer awareness, and the other side of this is about connecting those consumers with law firms, conveyancing firms that want to connect and demonstrate that they are sensitive to and will advise, using environmental due diligence, the impact of coastal erosion on the potential risk on the property.
We've all seen those videos and images of properties literally falling into the sea. It must be the case that most people sort of sit there and think, well, that's never going to happen to me.
Indeed, and there are communities, all along the coast, particularly if you think about Norfolk and Suffolk, some very vulnerable communities there that perhaps looked at, when they bought the properties 20, 30 years ago, or even 10 years ago in some instances, thinking, the coast is half a mile away. It's fine. That's not going to come towards me. And lo and behold, in that period of time, they've discovered that 3 storms later, and half that distance has been eaten up. It is frightening, at the pace of how some of these primarily sandy cliffs along the Norfolk coast, for example, are getting eaten away. People are now starting to think, what's going to happen here? How many years have I got left? So it is a serious risk. We've got currently, I'd say, probably about 10,000 homes that are now at serious risk, i.e. imminent potential risk of falling over a cliff. If you cast forward to 2050, which is not that far into the future, we're looking at quadrupling that, over 40,000 properties that are likely to be at serious risk. So this is a growing threat.
And the lenders have sort of really cottoned onto this as well, haven't they? And presumably they now won't be lending on properties that have they got a threshold at which they won't lend in terms of distance from a coastline?
Well, they'll flat refuse, to offer mortgages now where they're in that greatest risk. So they're looking at similar data to ourselves in terms of triaging offers. Not every lender is doing this, and therefore it does still form part of the important due diligence in terms of report on title and report back to the lender client. because there is a total loss on the asset that could occur within the terms of the mortgage. And as you know, David, a lot of loans are going out to 30 years now plus. The example I gave where seas could advance by tens or even 100 meters or so in that time, that could bring some of these properties into the orbit of this risk that already have mortgages on them. You could start with a loan, and then when it comes to a remortgage, the risk profile could have changed, and it could be problematic to get a remortgage with a new lender. We know already from things like energy performance requirements in the future, many lenders don't want mortgage prisoners on their books. So yeah, this is a significant issue right now.
And it's related to, and I don't particularly want to sort of bang the climate change drum in this podcast because that's not what we're here to talk about, and we've talked about it previously, but this is part of a wider climate consideration by lenders, by home movers, and by property professionals as well, to think about the impact of climate on property over the course of, like you say, extended mortgages.
I mean, the thing about coastal erosion is that this is a total financial loss. Where you've got flooding, yes, there's an impact on insurance. There's potentially an impact on obtaining a mortgage because of the insurance challenge, but there are mitigations in place in terms of flood re and things like that for flooding. But with coastal erosion, you have no such protection. So this is why the stakes are higher. The numbers might be less, but the stakes are higher. And I think that's the important point that conveyancers need to understand when it comes to performing that due diligence.
I want to come on to conveyancers' responsibility in just a second, but I also want to drill into the work of Groundshaw beyond the environmental and risk reports that you provide, because I don't know that a lot of conveyancers will fully appreciate the extent to which the impact that your data has across the wider property sector. This, for example, is something that I don't know that many conveyancers will fully appreciate, is a body of work that you do.
The important thing here is about the education here. And I think the conveyancers do have an important role in terms of education. I mean, we've been saying for a long while now that while they're not environmental or climate scientists, they have access to information that can help communicate that. And obviously there's a strong position of trust. This data also underpins lenders' decisions as well, particularly with regard to commercial properties. And there are plenty of them on the coast, don't forget as well. It does have a broad reach. And I think it's important to trust the modeling that comes with that. I mean, to your point about climate, yes, it is one of the three main financial risks that are present and clear and obvious today. It's about trusting the modeling that shows the pace of that risk and shows that projecting forward how much of that coast could eat away in that period of time. That's the important thing with regard to the consideration around the loan.
What are you hoping to achieve with this? You talked about some client education here. What's the conveyancer's responsibility? To what extent do they have to report on this kind of risk to clients? I'm sat here with my conveyancer's head on thinking, oh God, this is another thing we need to be thinking about, another website we need to be checking.
Well, I mean, as I say, it's aimed at the consumer primarily, and it's being marketed on that basis. But it's an opportunity really for conveyancers to encourage them to support the scheme, demonstrate their client care, and be on that site, connecting with potential home buyers through our and other people's marketing as well. You can differentiate by joining the scheme. It does provide a marketing opportunity, whether it's through yourselves as a firm or through your local law society. So there's a postcode checker on it, which engages the home buyer to look at where there's potential risk. So there is a bit of a screener up front that shows what the potential risk could be. And it also advises on what the implications of buying a house on the coast could be. As a homeowner, what you may face and what could happen should the worst happen, such as first responders, the council's involvement, what the utilities have to do. And we can get into some of that detail maybe later in this chat. Forewarned is forearmed here. And I think while we're not encouraging conveyancers to communicate all of this off the website, it's definitely a good idea to point a potential home buyer to the site and to demonstrate that this is the sort of information that we include as part of our standard environmental due diligence. And as you know, David, this forms one of the three main elements within the climate index module, which is automatically already in the report anyway. So it's just a case of drawing that out. And as far as the conveyancer's responsibility was concerned, which was one of your questions, they're already looking at subsidence and ground stability risks as part of the conveyancing handbook. It's one of those main physical risks. So the duty of care and the duty to warn and disclose, that's already there for that. And also the Law Society guidance on climate risk covers these points. So it falls within that existing orbit. So there's nothing extra that's being asked for here. It's just being alive to that, particularly where that property is on the coast.
I often sit when I have these conversations and try and present a balanced view of how the conveyancer might feel, how you as an information provider might feel, and ultimately how a homeowner feels, and what information that triumvirate is looking to get out of the property transaction. And there's a great chasm where information that home movers want and need is falling into. And this kind of thing, coastal erosion, I appreciate what you're saying about the Law Society guidance and some of the other responsibilities that conveyancers might have, but this is information that home movers want and need, that they need access to. And as you say, it is incumbent on the conveyancer to point them in that direction, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's all we have ever said that they should do, is point them at the relevant page on the report or to the website or to the postcode checker as a bit of initial triage. Because, once you start getting into the realms of, well, how quickly is that coastline moving, and am I going to be safe in 15 years? That's an absolute bear trap. That's the last thing we would be expecting or encouraging conveyancers to do. So it's in the same guise as flooding and general natural subsidence. It is pointing out that within a 5 or a 30-year risk, for example, based on the climate modelling and the pathway that we're on, and adjusted for storms that happen, and this is an important point, there needs to be a trust in the model and a trust to signpost. If there are further questions, then we're more than happy for the home buyer to pick up the phone and talk to us. That's always been the case.
So let's move on to operational element of Coast Clear. It's a website, as we've said, coastclear.co.uk. What information is being held on there? What information is going to be provided for home movers? And how are they going to be able to engage with it?
As I say, there's some general advice on the implications of buying a house on the coast and what that could mean in terms of potential insurance or mortgage risk, accessibility. And it explains as well, if you're a homeowner, existing homeowner, what the process is, as and when there is a significant risk to an imminent collapse. And, these are real live stories that are happening throughout the year. If I give you a really clear example, it's a well-known example now, but there's a place on the coast in Norfolk called Hemsby, and there's a street called the Marhams. The long-suffering residents there, the street is dying a slow death. Houses, as each high tide comes in, as each storm surge comes in, as each weather system that barrels down the North Sea comes in, the cliff chips away again and another house can go over. The sad reality is that there are first responders that will knock on the door. They will have power of evacuating the homeowner, and the council will step in. They'll secure the area, and then the utilities will come in and secure the remediation of what's going to happen with the pipe work. Because if you think about a street that's got pipe work in it, with sewerage, with electricity, if that road goes over the edge, which it has done in sections in Hemsby, then you've got a health and safety risk first and foremost there. So these are all things and all information that is on Coast Clear, so that if you have bought that house on the coast, you at least understand what's going to happen when the knock on the door occurs. It will become fairly obvious if you are on the coast that your garden is being eaten up bit by bit, but it's knowing what to expect, I think, which is the key. And by painting that picture, it does actually help the prospective home buyer think, well, hang on, do I want that to be me? And that's what people have to sort of think about very seriously with this.
And at the moment, it covers a certain percentage of the coastline, doesn't it? And plans to develop that further.
Yeah, the content we've got on there relates to some of the worst affected areas. So that's Norfolk and Suffolk, where you've got these sandy cliffs that are eroding at some of the fastest rates. But this is a problem that also affects the south coast. So chalk cliffs in Sussex are at severe erosion. Burling Gap is a good example near to our office in Brighton, where there are regular cliff falls, and there are some properties along there. Devon and Dorset as well. They have some fairly substantial falls. West Bay near Bridport is very well known for that. There's not least the risk that if you've bought a property by the coast, even if you don't have a property right on the cliff, you could be walking along that beach, and obviously you need to be aware of some of the hazards of potential cliff falls. I would say that the south coast, certainly in the southwest, the Norfolk and Suffolk coasts, and also the East Yorkshire coast, they're the sort of the main erosive coasts in terms of pace of erosion. But also don't forget, it's where sea levels are also rising as well. This isn't necessarily cliff falls, but this can also be low-lying land that's being eaten up by tidal erosion as well. And our sea levels are rising. They're going to go up by about a metre by the 2100, which I know is a long way away. But all you need is a high tide with a storm surge, and you've already got coastal flooding and a big erosion that happens as a result straight afterwards. So the house doesn't have to be on a cliff. It can be close to the shoreline too.
I think that's a very fair point. And we assume that for the likes of flooding, it's low-lying land. But of course, flooding affects people on hills because it means they can't get out of the property, they can't get anywhere, and we forget about that. We've got flooding at the moment, haven't we? And there's a lot of roads that have been affected. There was a school evacuated the other day, but the school was evacuated because the roads to the school were becoming flooded. It wasn't that the school was itself was being affected. So remembering that this isn't just about properties on a cliff edge, but actually on low-lying land is as important. The Coast Clear website is live now. You as an organisation are going to do quite a lot of activity around this over the course of the next 12 months, I suspect. How can people get involved, or what do people need to know to get involved?
Yeah, so we're going to be working with our property search company partners and regional law societies, particularly in those affected regions that I was telling you about. So, Yorkshire, East Anglia, Sussex, Devon, Dorset, those kind of areas. So watch out for events that will be posted through those channels. Get yourself sort of signed up to those. And I encourage firms to become Coast Clear conveyancers, which is ultimately what we want to achieve here. We're thinking about maybe devising stickers for windows and exciting things like that. If you remember the early days of CQS, there could be another one to add to the list that demonstrates that they've engaged with, understand, and provide signposting of this sort of information where it's relevant. So I encourage everyone listening to get on the program and come and join us.
I think there'll be lots of conveyancers that will remember the CQS stickers. I see the Lexel stickers knocking around periodically as well. So we like a good sticker on the window, but great to have you on the podcast. Thank you for coming and just sharing a bit about what Coast Clear is and your plans for it, David. Thanks so much for joining.
Thanks, David. Cheers.
The Today's Conveyancer podcast is available on your preferred podcast provider. It's also available on todaysconveyancer.co.uk. My thanks to David. Thank you as ever for listening, and we'll see you again soon.
You're listening to the Today's Conveyancer podcast, the leading source of information for residential property lawyers in England and Wales. Don't forget to subscribe and sign up to our free newsletter at todaysconveyancer.co.uk. You can also follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter.